Thanks for joining us for the film. We really hope you enjoyed it. We'd now like to present a recorded Youth Lab Q&A with the director, Henry Blake. My name's Mia, and I would like to ask you a bit more about, as you mentioned earlier, you have been first-hand witness of many of these powerful but difficult topics. And I was wondering what influenced your decision to tell this story as a short and then a feature-length film, as a fiction film rather than a non-fiction or another medium?
Very good question. Thank you. I as much as I love documentary, I don't feel particularly drawn to it, and I never have, and so it wasn't a form that I was particularly needing to explore. I think having all of my friends and having been a child actor and grown up around actors, I think there's a natural affiliation and a thirst to want to work with actors. So that really was driving me to choose to make a narrative, as well as knowing that working with vulnerable children and communities who are affected by county lines, there is a swathe of safeguarding issues and processes that a documentary could breach, if possible. And what you don't want to do with a documentary, especially with a topic like county lines, is put those children or those subjects at any more risk than they have to be. So it really was an ethical question as well, saying, actually putting a lens on this for real, it didn't make me feel comfortable. Answer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I equally was enthralled and really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for coming and
thank you.
Answering.
Thank you, Mia.
Hi, I'm Miles Answorth. So before we talk about the film itself, I want to ask you a little bit about your career as a social worker, if that's okay.
A youth worker.
Yeah, youth worker. Sorry.
Worker.
Thank you. Yeah, as someone who's had friends and acquaintances who've got into trouble with the law, which drew me to the subject, I'm curious what drew you to the subject in the first place.
Well, do you know what? When in 2011, I'd actually been fired from a stage door job because I left the theatre open over the whole course of the weekend, which I wouldn't recommend doing. And I said to the boss at that point, I was, oh, sorry, it won't happen again. She was like, you're damn right it won't happen again, Chief, you're gone. I was then kind of out of work and I needed to earn rent, I needed to pay rent. And some of my friends were actually doing like one-to-one youth work and mentoring. And so I got into it out of really like, they were doing it and they said it's interesting and it paid just a fraction more really than like waitering or, the classic sort of job titles that you do as a out of work actor or artist, etc. And the issue is that when I started doing it, I found it very tough, but I was also, the problem was I was quite good at it. I had a natural feeling for it, especially working with very vulnerable and complex young people. I don't know why, but I was drawn to it, and then I just kept doing it and sort of came to be known as the guy that could handle the sort of toughest and most complex cases. And in 2015, I was asked by a friend of mine to help her work with two groups of young people in a pupil referral unit in East London. And I did. I had never come across children who were being trafficked via county lines before. In my youth work, and so that year of work that we did was very distressing, and I felt very compelled to try and author a story which really showed the damage and the stakes of what can happen when a family and a young person become ensnared in county lines criminal networks. So that's how I came through it. I came through it from sitting opposite young people like Tyler, you know, and really feeling the atmosphere and the cost of what has happened and what was happening to them.
So my other question to you is, it's again on the youth work line. So there's a lot of different ideas that people have about youth work and how to deal with young people who commit crimes. And I think a lot of those ideas, or a lot of the more mainstream ideas, are quite toxic. Things like blaming parents, things like just advocating much harsher punishments. I remember hearing in a tabloid, I think, a secure unit get described as a holiday camp because it didn't literally lock children up and feed them bread and water. So I'm curious, are there any attitudes you think people need to either just drop altogether or take on, or both, when it comes to dealing with young people who commit crimes?
Well, one of the complex things about young people who commit crimes is that's obviously a very broad spectrum of crime and of committing. And there's a broad spectrum of young people as well who are committing those crimes. I think in relation to my work and working particularly with vulnerable children, you know, and this was very much the goal of the film, is I think it's very important from a safeguarding perspective and from a community perspective to not ignore or neglect the context of their vulnerability and to try and identify those vulnerabilities, in whatever shape or form they take, whether they be socioeconomic, whether they be ethnic, whether they be physical or psychological or emotional, educational. But those vulnerabilities need to be identified as early on in order to create a larger picture of vulnerable children and vulnerable young people, in order to create a more supportive, holistic and compassionate safeguarding system. Now, historically, what has happened is that a child has not been identified early enough as vulnerable. In fact, they've been labeled a problem, difficult, complex, volatile. And that then feeds into a larger, more convenient narrative, which is there are good children and there are bad children.
Oh, God. And
the bad children need to be put into, you know, special units, etc. And what that is doing is it's only compounding the issue, because often those children feel aggrieved, they feel cheated, they feel abandoned, because they themselves know somewhere inside them that actually they're quite vulnerable. And there are opportunities to connect with them and to shift their narrative, and those opportunities are being missed. So it's not as simple as do the crime, do the time, because often we need to try and examine, why did that child do the crime? What are the factors in their lives that might be contributing to that offence? And are they under any coercion, pressure, manipulation, or bribery in order to commit that crime?
Okay, nice. That's everything I wanted to ask you. I also just want to commend you. You've made a very good film. I felt it, and Conrad Khan is an amazing find. So kudos to you on that front. And I'll hand it back.
Hi.
Hi there.
My name is Ogna.
Hi, Ogna.
I have a few questions to ask.
Okay.
So I know that this film is based on the experiences you've encountered while working as a youth worker in East London. And I want to ask, when and how did you start writing the script for County Lines? And did you initially feel confident to direct this film?
I initially felt confident, yes, purely because I felt like I knew the subject matter, you know, to a degree that I didn't really know any other subject matter as strongly as well, if you like. And we started writing the short in March 2016. And then just kept writing essentially until the feature was made. So there was a lot of writing. And a lot of reviewing and a lot of feedback and a lot of constructive criticism. So it was a rigorous process. But yeah, I started the project in March 2016.
Can I have one follow-up question to this one? Because I'm a little bit interested. Not a little bit, I'm very interested.
Yeah,
the
sure.
thing is, like, what was the breaking point when you were working? Then you decided, okay, I need to show this in the film.
Two breaking points, really. Like, one was when a 15-year-old boy went missing, and when he came back, someone tried to slash his throat, and I got to spend some time with him and establish where he had been and if he was okay, and he survived. And he said he'd been in Aberdeen in Scotland for 3 weeks, and that was a major turning point for me. I'd never come across something like that before. So that was one moment, and then the other moment was with a boy who all right, Rosie, go away. No. Sorry, classic BBC News moment. That's my son. Where was I? Oh yes, working with a boy in 2015 who 9 times out of 10 would be perceived as being a major risk and threat to most people. Yet he was very distressed, very traumatized, and he told me that he had lost his friend. And when he was telling me that he had lost his friend to essentially drug dealing and that he had been killed, he was so grief-stricken and crying that I thought, you're actually in great pain, you know, and you're being labeled all sorts of different things. And actually no one is understanding how hard this is for you. Like, every day it's just so hard for him. And then he told me that, I said to him, I asked him, what are your aspirations like? And he told me that he loved reading and that he read Freud and Jung, Malcolm X's autobiography, and that he wanted to be a therapist because he wanted to help people like himself in the future, because he wasn't getting enough help. And that really broke my heart. Yeah, that was hard. So I haven't really thought of that for a while, but yeah. So that's when I went, people need to know how hard this is for young people, you know, like him. Because I think most people would look at him and just go, he needs to be locked up. And that's not correct.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, like, you chose the best medium to tell this story, because it influences everyone when you watch it. Yeah, I have another question. So while watching this film, I was fascinated to see how the relationships changed when Tyler, played by Conrad, got involved in this drug exploitation business. And the change of the power dynamic in the family was very well portrayed, at least in my opinion. How did you achieve this naturalistic performance?
Well, we cast Conrad, I think, about a year before he had done it. He's just done an interview where he said 2 years before, but that's not correct. So I'm just saying, like, we cast him a year before, so we had a lot of lead time from him and I to establish a relationship with one another. And I think that paid off, you know, because you really get time to get to know someone, not just as an actor, but as a person. And you really get an opportunity to see what's under the hood, really, you know, and understand maybe what their sensibilities are. And that was with Tyler, and then obviously with Ashley and that whole power dynamic. Ashley brought a lot to the table in terms of the role of Tony was extremely personal to her. So it was, you know, her mum, whilst a few aspects were not similar, she recognized a lot of Tony and her mother and their relationship, and I think she was very brave in essentially bringing that to the table as an actress. So I think when the work becomes personal like that, there's a kind of osmosis and a deeper sense of relaxation, because the actors feel like they just know these characters, and you know, and that's what you need to create a film like County Lines.
Thank you. And one last question. The story of County Lines is a portrayal of traumatic experiences that a lot of young teenagers have to go through, and this film is inspired by the stories you've listened to. And from the ethical side of this film, did it feel difficult to carry the responsibility of how you will portray their stories?
Yes, and it still does, you know. It still does. It's a multifaceted issue, you know. It has many aspects to it, and I am coming at it with this aspect through the aspect of my experience, through the aspect of the authenticity of my experience. And you can't include every perspective. You just can't, because I think one thing that I was never going to compromise on was the emotional power of the piece. I just was not going to do that. And so that gives you an answer in, well, if you're not going to compromise on that, then really you're left with this perspective, which is what it is, rather than trying to tell a broadsheet, you know, a more broader story. And yes, this huge responsibility, and it still weighs on me, you know, it still weighs on me. And but my thing around that is that if you can't handle that responsibility, then you shouldn't be making that film. You know, that's the thing. Like, if the film fails creatively, it's on no one else, it's on me. And that's, I think a lot of filmmakers in their early developing years struggle to adapt to that level of responsibility. I think that's why a lot of filmmakers go, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. I still love film, but I just don't want to, because actually there's a lot of responsibility that comes along with it.
Yeah, exactly. I think you chose the best perspective, in my opinion, because this film really struck me when we talk about it.
Well,
so
thank you.
Thank you. Like, great answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ugna.
Hello.
Neil, I've met you.
You have, quite a while ago.
Yeah, at the festival, right?
Yes, back in normal times, good old days.
Your hair's got longer.
It has. I was going to say, yeah. I wasn't sure if you'd recognize me with it.
No, I do. I just, it's got slightly longer. Lockdown locks.
And yours has got shorter.
Thanks, mate. No need to be rude. Don't need to be rude. Okay. Three kids.
So hi, I'm Neil.
Hi, Neil.
And I'd like to ask, when you were writing the screenplay, how did the film develop through the different drafts and rewrites? And why did you decide to have the 6-month gap, which happens about halfway through the film, where Tyler shifts from being a sort of reserved teenager to actually assaulting his mum?
The first part of your question is how did the script evolve? The scripts evolved. They became much more refined and actually, I think, isolated in their storytelling. So the first draft, again, was very broad. It was actually trying to include a few more different aspects to the story, whether that be the security force aspects, whether that be the political aspect. But after the first draft, on the feedback, in fact, everyone responded to one aspect and one aspect alone, and that was the mother and the son. They were like, we want to know more about that. So then your next drafts, you go into explore that. And the second draft was wild. It was like 124 pages in 2 weeks. We just had our second baby, our daughter, and I was surviving off no sleep. And 95% of that draft got flung out, but there was one scene that remained, and that's the chicken shop scene with Harris and Conrad. So it just became more refined, more economical, slicker, leaner. It's like, I think you're just trying to take the fat off every single time, aren't you? And then your second part of your question, the 6-month jump. So the 6-month jump comes purely because after the first episode where he is trafficked and goes away, and he has this god-awful experience, the choice then from a writing perspective is essentially what you are faced with is 6 months of that. That is what is going on for those 6 months. From a portrayal perspective, it's like, do you need to see that happen any more than once in terms of the tone that I was striking? The answer is no, you don't. And I think most people were predicting that it would just be a sort of play on those different experiences in trap houses, etc. But the key to it was, would it have more dramatic impact if we had that first terrible sequence, and then what happens if you jump 6 months later and you see this shocking transformation in the child? That, to me, cinematographically, from a visual language point of view, has more impact than just another series of god-awful scenes. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's something, because it's implied. Again, and the power of implication in scripts and cinema should never be underestimated. Like, some people have said, oh, well, I wanted to know what happened in that 6 months. Why? Like, we can guess what happens in that 6 months by jumping forward 6 months and seeing what has happened, like what the characters have become. And I think implying, as much as, there are some people who just can't be helped and just need everything spelt out for them, and so don't watch my films, I would say. Like, I just love films that imply and that force you to go keep up, and if you don't keep up, it's not my problem. Does that make sense? I just think it's more interesting. It's more interesting, more cinematic. I don't know if you agree, Neil, but
I do, yeah. I think, like you said, it kind of makes it all the more haunting, having that very kind of sudden character shift and kind of leaving us to wander the in-between details.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I also think opening 6 months later on that shot of him getting in the car and seeing the football stadium in the background is extremely poignant, and kind of again says everything in one shot, rather than just doing more trap house horror.
Definitely, yeah. And you mentioned then about your daughter, which leads very nicely on to my next question, which is that I understand that as you were creating the film, you and your wife, who was also producer on the film, were also raising 2 children of your own, which is a pretty amazing feat in itself.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, given that County Lines is a film very heavily about young people, did having children of your own affect the way that you kind of decided to approach the topic?
No. No. No, because of my youth work. Like, maybe I felt in 2015, 16 was when Victoria became pregnant with our first child. So maybe I did feel an added sense of responsibility there, but it's not something that I had time to reflect on in any great detail. I certainly probably can assume that I certainly started to have the conversation in my head, what would I do if this was my child? And I could actually ask that properly. So in that respect, yes, but I don't think it informed, I don't know if it informed the actual creation of the film. I don't know. I hope that helps. It doesn't, but it does.
That definitely does. That definitely does help. I mean, it must have been, I don't know, quite a different experience having your children actually on set at the time, is kind of what I was wondering.
Yeah, I mean, that was great when they weren't like, interrupting takes, just like with their crying or they're laughing. But I think on a low budget film that we were, and it was a pretty grueling shoot, the children ended up being a nice tonic to what was happening in front of the camera, and the crew were amazing. A lot of the crew are friends of mine, so they know our children, and they looked after them and had lunch with them, and that's a nice energy to have when you're making something like County Lines.
Yeah, no, that's really nice. Thank you so much for answering the questions, and also congratulations on the Bafta nomination, which just got announced. Yeah, really, really well deserved. Really pleased to see it.
Thank you, Neil. That's really kind.
Well, first of all, I just thought I'd say I'm very privileged to watch your film, not only because it's such a great piece of cinema, but also because I wasn't aware of these huge criminal networks that actually have such a destructive social impact. I just didn't know about it. And I use the word privileged because I think up until recently, I'd always associated the emergency services, particularly the police, as a means of reliable aid and, to support and defeat crime. But luckily, in the past 12 months, I've actually gained a better understanding that there is a bigger picture, and this isn't always the case. But I couldn't help but notice that aside from Tyler's mum calling for an ambulance, there's actually no police presence in the whole of the film. And I don't know if this was done intentionally or something that I've just noticed. If you could shine a bit of light on that, that would be amazing.
Yeah, of course. So it was an aspect that was brought up, and there's 2 reasons as to why. The first reason from a cinema perspective is once you start bringing police into something, and this was my sense when I was writing it, is once you start bringing police into something, it starts to feel a little bit like a procedural. It starts to feel like, oh, okay, we're sitting in interview rooms, it's like familiar ground. And I was just a bit like, I don't know, like, I don't know, cop drama, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. And I wanted to keep away from that. The second reason was, in my youth work, I haven't really dealt with the police. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've had the cops turn up. They tried to arrest one of the boys that I was working with once because he nicked my wallet, and I was like, you don't need to arrest him. It's cool. We'll like work it out through a bit of a conversation.
Yeah.
And they like he was really aggressive with the boy, and I was like, look, bro, it's all good. Like, you don't need to like chuck him in the back of your car. It's fine. But I haven't really dealt with them in a way that I felt safe and confident to paint a picture as well as I could with the characters. And I think police in film's really difficult to get right. I think because there's a lot of different aspects to policing, and I just was like, oh, I don't know. The bottom line is as well is that County Lines has been going on for years and has thrived under security force detection. So, you know, this whole idea that the police officers have been actively involved in the issue for a number of years and stopping it is just not true. So yeah, that was the reason.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think well, from what you said, that obviously demonstrates realism within the film. And I also think that by not having, you know, the police involved, it made the film feel more intimate in a sense. You know, there wasn't a third party trying to, you know, come in the way. But that's brilliant. Thank you.
I think intimacy is a really good word there, actually, because when writing a draft, I think I was trying to implement the police. And it was funny because as I was writing it, I remember going, the intimacy is just completely, well, when you bring police in, it's just like the intimacy, the character intimacy just goes. And it's just a shame. It's just a shame, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely agree. No, I thought it was a beautiful film, and thank you for teaching me stuff that I didn't know about, and that's what you can ask for in cinema. So thank you so much, Henry. Thank you for asking me.
No worries, Evie. Thank you.
I'm Fiona, and my question is, I've read that other British social realist films have gone on to impact legislation, and so I was just wondering, what kind of specific legislation would you hope to enact, or do you have any kind of suggestions that you'd hope to enact through the telling of this story, especially given how complex and widespread the issues raised in the films are, and how intrinsically intertwined they are with issues of lower socioeconomic income in the UK?
Okay. So, yes, there have been many films that have affected policy and legislation. There's a lot of noise at the moment with the film, actually behind closed doors, that the film at the end of the year last year was actually shown to the House of Lords. And there's a whole load of non-theatrical screenings coming up that are being used as a way of promoting certain, I think, policy progressions and awareness building perspectives. One of the things that's coming up at the moment at an event is there are talks of trying to create a policy in the law to in effect use children who are being exploited as information gatherers, which is a really bad idea because we don't need to be putting children at more risk as kind of moles, if you like, to information gather than they already are, especially when it comes to county lines. Like, the risk levels are so high and the threshold levels are so high, the risk levels are high and the threshold levels to get into that risk are so low that heaping risk on risk seems completely illogical. So the film is going to contribute to as a sort of deterrent factor to getting that policy pushed through, which I'm very in support of, because I don't want to see children being essentially mechanized as information mules. The other thing that I would hope is that what I would like to see is harm reduction in terms of drug legislation and treatment of drug users in the UK. So harm reduction in that, trying to get long-term drug users off street grade heroin and crack, and actually give them the support in their communities that they need to take them off the streets, because it's the street markets that are fueling the profit and the need and the market, etc. And if we were to introduce some more harm reductive policy, then we would reduce the need to control the street market, you know. And that means setting up like injection centers, you know, it means setting up drug support clinics where drug users can go and get the sufficient, you know, dosage. And to a lot of people that sounds counterintuitive. It's like, well, we're endorsing drug use. No, it's not endorsing drug use. It's just people don't understand how the illicit drug markets in the UK are really driven by the street, you know. And so taking those users off the street and reducing harm to them would then reduce the violence that is associated with these markets. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really insightful and really interesting, because I was reading quite a lot about it, and the issue, especially having watched the film, just seems so deeply ingrained. But that kind of support angle would solve a lot of those kind of issues, because you're supporting people rather than punishing them.
Yeah, you know, punitive measures are not working, you know, and reoffending cycles and the prison system, you know, are just the truth is that these systems are at breaking point within the UK because they haven't been updated. They haven't been given sufficient support to update annually, which they need to do. And so punitivism is something that, whilst politically plays into the public's hand quite well and plays into politicians being able to retain a relationship with the public, it actually, for something like County Lines, is counterintuitive. And so you've got at the heart of it a sort of perception issue, and you need sufficient political groundswell to bring in a harm reduction approach, because quite simply, to tell people that you're not arresting drug dealers but you're going to set up drug clinics for them for a lot of people is a problem to hear. You know, we live in very conservative times, you must remember that. You know, even with all the technology and all the social media and all the content and all the things that we have at the tip of our fingertips, I feel like we're becoming even more conservative in our mindsets. And I think that's a great shame, because for me, the goal with County Lines is to take the sting out of its tail, and the sting is the violence. And the violence comes from a need to control the street markets. So, you know.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I just, for making the film County Lines, I thought, did you have any reference films that you watched before making this film that like you looked up to and used as little references?
Yeah, one film in particular, which was Come and See, Elin Klimov's Russian film about the war, Second World War. Away, Billy. That's my daughter. So that was the main film, purely because that story is told from a child's perspective and the trauma that they absorb throughout their journey, and also how serious the subject matter is treated. And I felt that this subject matter needs to be treated with the same level of maturity and seriousness that Come and See treats its subject matter. Go away, Bob. No. And then, but mostly actually photographers, you know, Sphere, the cinematographer, we're very driven by photography. So photographers, Nan Golden, who does amazing work, William Eggleston, a Japanese photographer called Masahisa Fukasi, who did an amazing book, The Solitude of Ravens, a brilliant British photographer, Hannah Starkey. So we were driven by photography, and yeah.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you.
No
And
worries.
then, yeah, one more question that I have is, do you have any, like, would you recommend any films that aspiring filmmakers or aspiring directors should watch? You know, like classics.
Oh, I've never been asked that. That's a really good question. I've never been asked that. Candyman. Watch Candyman. Watch Battle of Algiers, which is an incredible film. Watch Jaws. Anything by Celine Sciamma. Watch. Watch Easy Rider. Watch Come and See. Watch Breaking the Waves. Watch Dancer in the Dark. Watch The Hunt. Watch anything by Barry Jenkins. Right, Alf, get out there. Watch oh, let's have a kids movie. Watch Stand By Me. Amazing film. What's Eating Gilbert Grape? Watch Ozu, anything by Ozu, anything by Kurosawa, and anything by Bergman, particularly Wild Strawberries and Fanny and Alexander.
A long list of things to watch. I'll have
And there's
to
so
rewatch.
many more out there. That's the thing. Oh, and watch let's say what's it called? Le Samurai by Melville. That's an amazing film. Anything by Melville, but watch Le Samurai with Alain Delon. It's a French Bond film, and it's better than any Bond ever made. Yeah.
I'll have to rewatch this whole like session too. Like,
I know. Al needs to be like, there needs to be a chat bar on this or something, like, because they're good films. But yeah. What else? Oh, The Goonies is a great film. I love The Goonies. Watership Down. Oh, The Princess Bride.
oh yeah. It's a good
Come
one.
on,
It's a
come
good
on, Princess Bride. What's the other one that I love from my childhood? Willow with a young Val Kilmer. Great film. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good list. That's gonna be a nice, like, we could even spend a whole hour of listing the films.
Yeah, I mean, I could just
watch
read
this.
this.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Hi again, Henry.
Hi.
So I work for a charity, and my role is essentially to help. I work with young people and try to encourage them to look at and consider careers in the arts and culture industry. So this could be anything, film, TV, anything like that. But I was just wondering if you had any words of wisdom for those people that are, on the cusp of considering going along that path, because I think along with COVID, there is such a stigma around the arts and culture industry, and it's almost considered a risk to, you know, go down that route. I was just wondering your thoughts and feelings on that. And any like words of advice, perhaps?
Well, the truth is that it is a risk.
Mm-hmm.
It is a risk. So there's no point trying to see it through rose-tinted glasses. You know, it's a wonderful life, a life in art. The ups are very up and the downs are very down. I think if you really are serious about it, then find your people, find like-minded individuals and make shit with them. You know, you can't do it alone. You can't try and go into filmmaking and go, right, I'm going to do this solo, Han Solo style. You need people, you need to build a team, and you need to fight for those people, even if you have fallouts and you have disagreements. You know, I've fallen out with all of my close creative family, but I love them and I won't give up on them. And when you don't give up on them, you get something like County Lines, you know? So acknowledge very early on that you need to find people. You don't need awards. You don't need any of that. And you know, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to get them. But you can't make great art with by yourself, unless, of course, you're a painter. But even then, the argument is, you know, Pollock had his wife who took him out to the barn, locked him in the room and fucking said, you're not coming out. And, you know, and so you have to argue that there are always people behind great artists who have a huge effect. A lot of the time they're women, you know. And I just think it's about creating a community. And I think the sad thing about these days is, even pre-COVID, is that young people, from my perspective, spend so much time by themselves. And there is this whole need and this whole trend in filmmakers now where they can do it themselves. They can edit themselves, they can film themselves, and you can walk around all by yourself with it all in your backpack and just shoot and then mix and edit and output. Now that's very good, and on a skill level, that's wonderful. And I work with some young people at the Roundhouse who are like that, or I have done. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when I gave them an exercise to cut something, a 3-minute video, together, and they had to agree and discuss and collaborate, they couldn't do it. You know, they couldn't do it. They couldn't work with each other to get a final piece. And I said, so you can have all the technical skill in the world, but if you can't work and communicate and collaborate, the reality of it is the higher up you go in the food chain, the more you are going to have to communicate, collaborate, compromise, and be understanding of other people's perspectives. So you better well get used to communicating your point of view to others. You can't do it on your own, you know? And that will set you up far better than going, I'm going to win a Bafta, or I'm going to make a massive film and make lots of money.
Yeah,
I
was like that. I said when I was younger, I was like, I'm definitely going to win an Oscar. Not going to happen now, but yeah, I think those key words that you said, communication and collaboration, is so key. That was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was great. Really wonderful questions.
Yeah. And Henry, you were fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about the little tykes.
That's great. That will make it.
Yeah, you can put that in.
Trivia, it's actually the 5-year anniversary today of that BBC interview. So I feel like you maybe have taken it away and now it's your thing.
What's is it the 5-year anniversary today?
Today.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. All right. Well, the baton has been passed to me. Well, thanks. I mean, that was wonderful. You know, it's a real pleasure, and I really appreciate your support, and Elle and Mike for setting it up. I hope it didn't waffle too much.